Howdy, folks. We're going to continue our lesson today about mindsets in education and the idea that we can learn about our own learning process, and that by learning about it, we get better at it. Just the way we practice everything else, if we take learning as a goal in itself seriously, if we put ourselves in the right mindsets, we can really start to conquer and control how and what we learn, and be a lot more effective in school and education, not just to get good grades, but to actually learn things for long-term use in our lives. So our goals for today are, number one, to understand what does it take to learn, what conditions need to be present for a human to learn optimally. And then number two, kind of understand how to develop intelligence through this idea of metacognition, which we'll explain to you when we get there. So I want to start with a kind of a big question. In this world of connectivity that we live in today, like we've got Google, we've got YouTube, we have calculators and graphing calculators, we've got programs like Grammarly and Photomath. Like pretty much any problem that you have is just a Google search away, or anything you're trying to learn. I'm not so hubristic and prideful to think that like my classes, the things that I'm teaching are so individual to me that you need me to learn. You don't. You can just Google it and probably find something useful. And so the question that I want you to pose to yourself early in this semester is, does learning in school matter? Why or why not? If I can just Google the answer to something, why do I ever have to learn it? And my argument is going to be that learning in school does matter. And hopefully I can kind of convince you of that throughout this short video. So let's start with the conditions that a human needs in order to learn. And there is a couple of aspects that we're going to take a look at. So the first one that we took a look at yesterday was the brain, those neurological connections, which is awesome because every human brain has these neurological connections. They're constantly changing. They're constantly updating themselves based on the experience and the practice we give them, right? Doesn't matter how old or how young you are, how good or bad you are at something, your brain has the ability to grow and make new neurological connections. In order to do that optimally, there's two pieces that we want to make sure that are working to help our brain make connections. So the first one we'll start with is the physiological, is we need to learn, in order to learn, we kind of have to feel okay. And if you see this is a pyramid called Maslow's hierarchy of need. You don't need to remember that. This guy named Maslow was a psychologist and studied that in order to like really become the best self you could be, you kind of had to go up the steps of this pyramid to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve in life. And that starts with this idea of physiological well-being, right? You have to have food. It's really hard to study when you're hungry or you're thirsty or you're cold, or you're sick, right? Doesn't that distract you from your learning? Not to say you can't learn without any of those things, but just being aware that like I need to physically be okay in order to learn. And then that kind of steps up into, do you feel safe? It's really hard to learn something if you're worried about like someone knocking down your door and beating the crap out of you. Like that is not a good learning environment. So both your emotional well-being and your psychological well-being. That doesn't mean that you have to have a perfect day in order to learn, not by any means. What it means is that you need to be aware of these things that might be affecting your learning. So like I had a crappy day, maybe, I got in a fight with my brother or something like that. And that's going to affect the way that I learn. And it'll be something that I have to overcome in order to learn well. So just keep those in mind. So that's number one, feel okay. Second thing we need after we're like, okay, I'm in a good space, is I need motivation to learn. And I think a lot of times in high school, this is a tough one to get for yourself because there's two types of motivation. First one is intrinsic, meaning it's coming from internally. You're doing something for your own self-satisfaction, or you see the benefit to it yourself. It takes a lot of work to get to find that self-motivation. Like you're taking a math class or a science class, and maybe you're not as interested in biology as the teacher is talking about it, but you want to get the grade. That's not necessarily doing it for self-motivation. My challenge to you would be, in whatever class you take, try to find something that makes it worthwhile for you. Make that material valuable to yourself. And that's a tough thing to do, especially when we reward extrinsic motivators so much in our society, like doing something for grades or doing something for money or doing something for recognition, doing something for someone else to jump through their hoops and not necessarily for your own rewards. And this is the place where a lot of people start in terms of motivation, is extrinsic motivation. I know I did when I was in high school. I was all about the grades. Like, I wanted good grades. So it wasn't necessarily whether I was learning the material or not. It's whether did I get a good grade on the test or not. And that led to a lot of shallow learning on my part. And it took me a while, even halfway through my college, to figure out what I really wanted to do and what I wanted to use whatever class I was taking to make it valuable to myself. And these are kind of the steps that we take to build intelligence, to make ourselves smarter. And I think once we get to that idea that we should be intrinsic, self-motivated in order to figure out how to make learning work for ourselves, education becomes a lot easier. I really like this quote that says, "Children must be taught how to think, not what to think." And that's what I want us to focus on this semester. How do we think? How do we learn and make things valuable to ourselves? Because we all might have different perspectives on the content that we're learning. And that's not necessarily that important. What's important is that we're learning how to learn. So I will make an argument that school in general is a good idea because of this concept called schema. A schema is just like a framework in your mind about how the entire world works. Everyone has their own perspectives and their own understanding of the world. And it's kind of visualized really well by this brain where we've got like nodes of knowledge and they start to connect to other nodes of knowledge. So maybe this purple one, here's my English knowledge, and that somewhat connects to my science fiction knowledge because like this dot's what I know about Star Wars, and that connects to my science knowledge, which connects to my history knowledge. The more we're able to put onto that framework, that mind map that we have, and make connections, the better we are. And so I think there's value in learning sort of a central curriculum where we have a little bit of knowledge about math and science and history and English. So as a culture, we can kind of pull on some similar ideas and then start adding our own within the context of everything else. It's just a good framework, a good foundation on where we start as human beings in order to build bigger and newer ideas. Because nothing is learned in a vacuum. You're always putting your own perspective onto it, and being able to make those connections is huge when it comes to intelligence. I think the smartest people that I've known are not the people who know the most. They're the people who can connect to the most. So when we're straight up talking about intelligence, like how smart you are, I'm not so worried about grades being a reflection of intelligence. I'm way more worried about, can someone think well for themselves and connect it to a wider array of ideas? And it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of processing and effort and challenge. But I think that when we redefine intelligence as that, not about grades and how much you know, but it's about this ability to recognize what you don't know and what you still need to know in order to become a more connective person. Cool. So if you're at this point, we're going to do a little activity. I want you to pause this video and I want you to take 5 minutes and jot down everything you can remember. Don't go back and rewatch it. I want you to pause and try to remember things about learning and schema and intelligence that I just talked about. Doesn't matter if you get it right. What matters is that you're making those neurons in your brain fire and think back. And even if you're only half paying attention, what did your brain pick up? So pause. Did you really pause? Okay. We'll go on. So after you get your brain dumped down, we're going to talk about our next skill. And this idea of when we're challenged in our learning, how much struggle is too much and how do we know and how do we handle it? One of the skills that I'll give to us is called metacognition. And I'm going to give us another little activity here for you to pause and do. So I want you to check this out. I want you to draw this picture on a scratch sheet of paper. Again, press that pause button, set a timer on your phone, and actually do this. But the trick is only give yourself 8 minutes to draw it, and you have to use your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, use your left hand. If you're left-handed, use your right hand. Give it a shot. press pause, draw this picture. Did you draw it? Cool. I hope so. Because what this does, it's just a good reflection about challenge and struggle within education. So think about these concepts. Like, if you were asked to do this again, what would you do different to make this drawing better? What did drawing with your offhand force you to do? And what might this activity actually represent? Well, the reason why I have you draw with a non-dominant hand is just to introduce that struggle and challenge that you might experience in high school, right? Taking a grammar lesson might feel like drawing with your non-dominant hand, right? It may not be something that comes natural to you. But I also wanted you to do it in one line in order to accept your own mistakes. Like, you just can't go back and fix everything. You're going to have to go with the flow. You make a mistake, cool, keep going. How do I fix it in this constraint? And then if we did this picture every day, do you think you'd get better at it? And I can 100% guarantee you that you would. If you practice drawing this picture with your non-dominant hand every day, you would get better. Because I've done this in some of my past classes. We've drawn this picture every week. And by the end of the semester, people are really good at drawing this picture by Picasso. So what we just did there was the concept of metacognition, where we had a task, we had to think about that task, and we had to think about our own thinking. Because if we break down metacognition, the two main roots of it are meta, which means kind of beyond, and cog, which is knowing or knowledge. So we are beyond our first level of knowledge. It's not just about drawing. Now we're thinking about how we drew. It's that next higher order of brain function. So it really means just thinking about thinking. And the more we do it, the more we can kind of control our brain and just be aware, self-regulate of what's going on in our own learning. So there's kind of a cycle here where we'll get a task. I'll have you evaluate, what are you good at in this task? What are you bad at this task? We'll have an approach, like we'll make some plans. What do I need to do to achieve success? And then I'll test it out. How did I do? And then here's the part where I think high school falls short, and I'm going to try to do my best to fix this, is we have to reflect on this application. Like, when we had a task to do and we had a test or a quiz or whatever, if we don't take time to reflect on our learning, where were our holes, where were our successes, we won't actually finish this learning cycle. And again, our learning will just be this shallow level application of what could be really useful knowledge. And then we'll keep going through this cycle until we get it. That's my goal. So the idea behind all of this is you can learn anything. You can set yourself up well to learn by regulating your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, or just being aware of it, finding some motivations, and then reflecting on learning. Because remember, when you're faced with a challenge, it is challenging, it's struggling, it's frustrating. But remember, those neurons inside your brain makes new connections to neurons every time you think and go through this process. And that overcoming a challenge is awesome. It fills you with joy, it fills you with pride, it fills you with excitement. It feels good to get a good grade or get a good grade on a test or just know something. So my last little thought experiment here is I want you to think of one thing you loved learning. Maybe it's a skill or a concept or a hobby. And when you approach the rest of the semester in any of your classes, try to find that love of learning that you had for music or basketball or reading or whatever it is, and apply it to any concept or content that you've got. So just as a quick review, we understood what it takes to learn: physical and psychological well-being, or at least regulation, be aware of it. And then you have to find some motivation, and then use the skills of metacognition. Like, think about your own thinking. Think about your own process in learning of setting goals, trying them out, evaluating, and trying it again. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Good luck.